Hi, everyone. I think we are live. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to our first webinar of 2022 on how skills-based hiring can future-proof your recruitment. I'm Shellef, VP of Customer Success at Vervoe, and I'm happy to be here today to lead the discussion on what skills-based hiring is, its benefits, where and how to implement it in your hiring process, and tips and tricks on how to master it. Let me introduce to you our two guests today. We have Christian Brenner, who is a senior technical leader with over 20 years of experience as a developer, architect, and technology practice lead. He has an extensive background and understanding of both legacy and cutting-edge technologies, and is currently head of technology at Merkle, Australia. Christian, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And since building her first website in 1996, Ani Moller has overseen the delivery of large transformative projects for companies like Jetstar, Qantas, University of Canberra, Holden, KPMG, and more. She spent 7 years working for Isobar, now Merkle, Australia, finishing up as an executive director of delivery last year. She's now a business transformation consultant. Ani, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And everyone in the audience, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them in the chat and we'll try to get to them throughout the session. All right, so let's get started. Before we really get into it, I thought we'd start with like an icebreaker type question related to today's topic. Christian, Ani, what's the worst candidate experience or hiring experience you've witnessed? Now, this can be experience as a candidate or as a hiring manager making a bad hire. Christian, do you want to go first?
Oh, I can. Yeah, sure. I think, like personally, I haven't sort of personally experienced any bad hiring sort of situations on the candidate side. Like being a candidate, I think my experiences have generally been really positive. I can certainly speak to quite a few mistakes on the other side of the equation, though. Certainly, thinking back to the earlier part of my career when I was, a younger leader and didn't have, quite the experience with different approaches to hiring, and there was more of a lean towards, traditional CV, traditional interview type of environments. There was one scenario sticks out in particular where I ended up hiring a particular person who I won't talk about in great detail, but I thought they were fantastic. They certainly did everything they needed to on paper. They did everything they needed to in the interview, and they were just completely wrong for the role that I had. And I look back on that now as my biggest hiring mistake of my career, and I think it's shaped a lot about how I go about things these days.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think a lot of us can relate to that. I'm sure we all have a similar story. Ani, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I definitely have stories like that. Too many. But from a candidate perspective, I wouldn't say this is like the worst experience, but related to skills-based hiring and what that can do for people, I was convinced that I would make a great project manager in digital, having come from a software development background. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't get a job, even though my skills were completely transferable. And there was this agency that I really wanted to work at, and they didn't give me the job. They eventually gave me the job because I did keep reapplying until someone was finally a hiring manager that would give me a chance. But that experience, kind of like what Christian said, that experience has shaped my own personal views of things like skills-based hiring.
Yeah, wow. And I'll quickly share something really to kind of just set, the pace as well. Well, as a candidate in the past, I've had hiring gaps, had my kids, it was just daunting going through that process, never getting a call back or getting a call back and going to the different interviews and then never getting a call back after that. And it usually had to do with that gap probably, I assumed. But as a candidate, obviously I've seen improvements nowadays with technology and things that are coming out into the market. But one particular experience recently that I heard about wasn't anything personal. A friend shared that one of our friends was hired into a role in a different company. She moved from a really well-known company into another one. And 2 months into that role, she realized that she wasn't good for it. Like she could not perform exactly what it is that they wanted. She couldn't fit. It was project management, but speaking directly to developers. And she went back to that previous company that she was at. And she was so lucky that they were willing to take her back. But what happened there is that company took her in because of where she was working, right? They saw this big brand. I'm like, oh, she could totally do the job. But had they been looking at something other than her CV, where she was working, skills-based hiring probably could have saved them there from making that mistake. You can save a lot of companies for these types of mistakes that we've described right now, right? So let's get into it. Let's talk about skills-based hiring, right? And how it can help future-proof our recruitment. So let's start with this question. And Christian, we'll start with you. So skills-based hiring based on skills. What is it? How long has it been a part of your process? What were you doing before you started hiring, based on skills?
Yeah, I think, like I said, in the early part of my career, I think it was very much a focus on the traditional sort of CV-based, screen the CV, read the details, look at the educational and job backgrounds, decide whether you're going to go to interview, and then do an interview. And it was, looking back on it, it was largely based on gut feel, I suppose, which isn't really helpful to anyone, as it turned out. And like I said, that person that I hired, they ended up leaving that role for us within 3 weeks of their own accord, because it wasn't working for them and it wasn't working for us. And there's a lot of time and energy goes into hiring somebody. You really can't afford to make those kind of mistakes. I actually came into skills-based hiring almost by accident and through necessity, to be honest. I was working for a company where I had to scale a team very quickly in a relatively short period of time. And the only way that I could do that was to rely on tools rather than myself and my own time to be able to do that. And those tools had that sort of beneficial side effect of also extracting or making the process fairer and making the process less, specific to the way that I was perceiving particular things, so less subjective.
Right.
And in that process, that was actually Vervoe that I sort of stumbled on in that process. And, that allowed me to then start to test people based on the things that they could do, based on questions and scenarios and, code challenges and things like that. I think that's something that I've sort of really used ever since then.
That's great. Great to hear. Annie, what about you?
In terms of what is skills-based hiring?
Yeah, for you, what is it for you? What's your experience with it?
I mean, so for me, the main thing was when I started to really learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to understand my own personal biases and the fact that I may be screening out people based on biases that I have as a white person, as a having a particular position in society. And I read all of these articles around, what that means and how skills-based hiring can support that. And it has been really like it's been a life change, to be honest. It's helped me break down my own internal biases by focusing on skills and what that person can offer, rather than the judgments that you make based on a resume. And let's be fair, we all have those judgments, whether we wish we didn't or not.
Right. That's right. It's so true, Annie. I totally agree with you. I mean, even to this day, like when we do hiring, we use our own system. Shameless plug here. We use Vervoe because honestly, I mean, we believe in hiring people based on merit, right? So when I hire into my team, the focus for me is really those skills. The CV for me, if I look at it, it's later on in the process and it's just for conversation, right? Once I know that person can do the job, let's just talk, right? But I totally agree with you that it really helps kind of mitigate the bias when you're using skills-based hiring instead. So let's get into, how do we implement skills-based hiring, right? What do we do? Where and when in the process should we be using it? How do we fit it in? Is it based on the role, seniority? Do we use a top, mid funnel? Can you explain how you go about that process, Christian?
I think, look, it sort of depends on the organization, depends on the role, depends on what skill sets you're looking for and how you're able to actually test for the skills that you need for those roles. So it's a little bit of a horses for courses scenario. in terms of how we do it and how I do it, I think, like I said, it's something that I kind of came on by accident and didn't really actually realize what I was doing at the time, I suppose. And it was only in hindsight that it sort of became apparent, some of these benefits, because what I found through that process was that I was starting to screen people that I may not necessarily have previously included in the screening process. But really, in terms of focusing, in terms of doing the skills-based hiring, there's kind of a range of things that you can do. You can focus on scenario-based questions. You can focus on code challenges, for example, if you're doing developers. You can focus on actually role plays. You can focus on presentations. Those sorts of things give the individuals the ability to demonstrate what they're capable of and the way that their thought processes work and how they solve problems, rather than necessarily just having the right buzzwords in their CV or memorizing the right answers to particular sort of formulaic type of questions where you're just looking for something to come out of a textbook.
I think the most important thing is to start with what are the principles, mindsets, and core skills of the role that you're hiring for. So I think we're very used to looking for, what are the correct letters or certifications that they have and what school did they go to? But if you're, if you're looking for a person who you just want to be able to understand their critical thinking skills, then you can put together a scenario that just tests the critical thinking skills. And that's something that you can't see any of that in a resume.
Yeah. Right. And I think that part of how you go in, you need to change your perception as to how you go into an interview process as well, into a hiring process. You need to think about things through the lens of what can this person do, rather than what the person can't do, and think about it as to how you can employ their skills and what you can get them to do and to be really comfortable and capable of delivering, rather than necessarily whether they tick all of the boxes for a particular role that you have in mind or not.
Yeah, and I think in terms of like when you do it, again, that completely depends on the seniority of the role that you're looking for, and also whether or not we're in the Great Resignation or not, because we don't have quite the same luxury that we did a couple of years ago to be able to put people straight through skills-based hiring, because it is an employee market at the moment. But I think if you're looking for more junior staff members, you can probably put them into a skills-based funnel immediately. Yeah. And if you're looking for more senior people, you're probably going to have potentially more soft skills that you're going to be looking for rather than, letters or what have you. So that might be something that you do as part of the process, but probably not the first step. But again, it depends on the role.
Yeah, right. I agree with that.
Very true. Very true. And, when you're thinking about where you're going to put it in the process, or, if it's a junior entry type role, how do we think about the skills? How do you think about the skills you're going to assess, right? How do you decide that? Are you looking at your team? Are you looking at your competency framework, understanding the skills that, the skill gaps that you possibly have? Like, how do you go about deciding what skills to assess? And do you put an emphasis on these skills in your job descriptions? Do these change every single time?
Look, to be honest, there's still the need to have job descriptions out there. There's still a need to have a core set of skills that you're kind of looking for roles. But when you're in the position where you've got, a role that's not necessarily perfectly defined or can be shaped a little bit, and sometimes, organizations can be a little bit more flexible as to how a role actually ends up working in practice. I think those are good use cases for when you can start to be more more able to see, where a particular candidate can fit into the organisation and be, a skilled practitioner rather than necessarily aligning to a particular JD. Right. You can't necessarily do it all the time, and there's still, some sort of degree of structure that goes along with what you're looking for. But, if you have a largish team, if you've got a team where you have a good understanding of the skills that you've got already on the ground through, a skills matrix or something similar to that, then it gives you that power to be able to go into an interview or into a candidate screening process and say, right, well, I'm not necessarily hiring for a particular role. I'm hiring to hire great talent. And if that person feels like they might fit somewhere else, you should always have an open mind to that sort of thing and be able to pivot and to redirect that sort of conversation and the process, if needed, to get them in the door. Because ultimately, it's about getting the talented people into the team. Whether or not they align to the JD that you've got open or not, you should try to keep an open mind as much as possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies don't have competency frameworks, or not ones that are very clearly described in a way that you could easily just, whip out some scenarios and write a list of questions. The way that I like to think about it is, especially if you've got a team that already exists, you're literally just looking at what are the skills that you love out of each person, make a list, do some mind mapping, and see which ones are the common themes of what's working well in your team. And then if you've got specific things that you wish you could that you could address, again, listing out those skills and figuring out what's the flip to that lack of skills. And I think also what's important is not just hiring for the skills that everyone else already has in the team, but looking for skills that maybe might kind of broaden your kind of collective knowledge and IP.
Yeah, that's a good point. And with any change, any implementation, and thinking about the skills and all of this, we always run into challenges, right? So what challenges have you run into implementing skills-based hiring?
Annie, do you want to go first on this one? I went first on the last few.
That's a few. Look, I think it really depends on whether you are using skills-based hiring to kind of cut down your recruitment time, or if you're just adding to your existing recruitment process. So one issue that I found is that we were making our skills test too long. And, we're 2 years into a global pandemic and no one has any patience anymore, and it's an employee market. So I think you need to be really careful around how many questions you're putting in, and also how long those questions are taking people to answer. Because if you are doing scenario testing, if you think about how long that scenario would take to, actually be addressed in the workplace, a lot of the time, like even just responding to a single scenario can take hours of someone's time. So I think we need to be really conscious of the time that we're asking for people. So we have had a few people who had dropped out of the process just because they're like, I don't have the energy or the time to do this right now.
Interesting.
Which is unfortunate, because it's a really good process to understand, how that person may fit in, and also whether or not that person wants to work in an environment where you have to work within those scenarios. But I think that's definitely something to look out for.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's similar, like I've experienced as well where candidates, even before COVID, where candidates will drop out of the process, or they're not interested in going through a multi-stage sort of screening process, which you can't do now, by the way, anyway. But yeah, in particular, that you have to find the balance between what's the right amount of time and energy to ask a candidate to put into the process. I know there's a lot of noise in the industry at the moment about that, and about what we can expect from people who are applying for jobs versus how much we should sort of take at face value. Finding that balance is the challenge. The other thing too is in terms of getting the screening process set up in the first place requires a lot of upfront effort. And it can sometimes be the can that gets kicked down the road. Hiring managers and senior people are always busy. They often don't have the time to set aside to do that kind of detailed setup work.
Yeah.
And so making that time and making that effort can actually pay off significantly, and it can pay off pretty quickly. So it's worth committing, but it can sometimes be a challenge to sort of convince yourself that it's worth it early on.
That's right. And this is the kind of stuff we sometimes hear with recruiters that we work with, right? The challenge of kind of like getting the hiring managers to participate or seeing the value of using this. So like, how do we get them on board? How do we show them the value? That's the kind of questions we get from them. And, what kind of results can they expect? How long would it typically take you to put together an assessment, as an example?
That's a good question. It's not short. So I think, the way that I had approached it, it was one of those 80-20 sort of situations where it was basically ever evolving. And I probably spent, like realistically, I probably spent a good day up front working through like what were the right questions, getting other people to feed into those questions, like tweaking and tailoring them, setting up the system. But that process was probably a day over a period of time. And then every time I would use that process, I would immediately go back and go, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and I would tweak it. So it was basically ever evolving with the goal of making it as easy for people to answer, for me to get as much information that's necessary and useful that would be in addition to the interview.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, look, it starts off as a fair investment of time, and the first time you do it, it's probably the hardest because you've got to work through the process of actually doing it yourself. And certainly if you've got more than one type of role that you're hiring for, like for instance, I'm hiring front end, back end, QAs, technical leads, senior leaders, etc. All of those are going to require different types of questions, different types of skills-based assessments. And so going through the process of setting all of that up is quite challenging and does take a lot of time. And you're probably looking at 1 to 2 days to get the initial role up and running, and the first screening gets a little bit quicker after that. And once you've done one, though, what tends to happen is the subsequent ones do get faster. And once it's there, you can use it again, and you can generally use it for a fair while. So it does take some time to get set up, and it's not, insignificant, the amount of time. But it does generate pretty significant benefits pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think the way how to get hiring managers to be on board with this is, in my opinion, and this may be controversial, I feel like the only people who are not on board with skills-based hiring or setting up this kind of scenario-based testing would either be people who are quite inexperienced at hiring and haven't made enough mistakes to realize that there's a thing that they're going to want to try and look out for in the future, or people who are actually totally fine with their own biases. So I think once you've got people who have made mistakes, all you need to do is just talk about the mistakes that have, you've made, all the things that you wish that would be better. And it kind of sells itself. My own process of actually using Vervoe was we really improved the candidates that we were interviewing by putting them through skills-based hiring. So instead of having to go to interviews and we're like, that was actually the wrong person, we shouldn't have even interviewed that person, we've just wasted an hour and a half of everyone's time, we're getting the right people straight away.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I found the more that I used skills-based hiring, and in particular used Vervoe in this particular scenario where I was scaling, that team up, the more that I used Vervoe, I found the less I was actually really caring about what was in the CV. And I found that after a while I was looking at CVs going, well, I can't really tell. I'm just going to send them through Vervoe and get them to do the screener anyway. And so I ended up just making that transition, irrespective of other stuff. And I think if you're trying to bring on board hiring managers, I think, for me, the two key benefits that I got out of it straight away was the time saving. Yes, it took time to set up, but it saved a significant amount of time when I'm trying to screen a lot of people.
Right.
And I was able to screen them consistently through that process. And the second key advantage was that I actually started to screen people that I would probably not have looked at previously. And I've got a number of situations where I was convinced that a particular candidate wasn't good enough for the role based on the CV, based on what I could sort of get from the gut feel that I'd previously relied on. And yet I thought, no, I'm going to send them through anyway, just to be fair. And they went through and they ended up passing that with flying colors. And I was like, okay, well, I better speak to this person. And we ended up hiring those people, and those people ended up becoming some of our best performers. So that kind of increased, fairness, I suppose, gives you the ability to attract and to find people that you might otherwise miss out on.
That's awesome.
And I had exactly the same situation.
Yeah.
Someone that I was convinced was not right for the role, put them through skills-based hiring. I was like, oh, okay, those were really good answers. Ended up hiring the person. They did a great job. But yeah, my gut was wrong.
No, that's awesome to hear. And that was probably my next question. Like, were you pleasantly surprised at some point? And it's quite incredible. Like, once you start doing this type of hiring, and the people that come through really, and you look at their CVs after, you're like, I totally would have just passed it on had I really just relied on that CV. And then sometimes and then I looked at people who didn't score so well just to compare. I don't know if you guys ever done that. And then you look at their CVs are like, oh, wow, this person went here, this person did that. Like, it's such an amazing, like, I probably would have gone with them if I had just looked at the CV. But now that the assessment, I'm like, whoa, what happened here, right? They probably had someone help them put it together, their CV, I don't know. Right? Those kinds of things happen, they still do. So it's great to have the skills-based hiring to kind of just like help you there. And I'm glad that it's helped you guys and that you've been able to share all of this with us today. So let me see if there was any questions. Do we have any questions from the audience? Maybe something that we've missed. Let's see. In the meantime, I'm going to try to find a question in the chat. What can you say about the impact it's had on your team? Hiring in this way, the people that are coming in, you already know their skills. Is it easier for them to onboard? Do you find that they're successful right off the bat, right? You said you save time, you're hiring better quality. You're seeing that through the process when you're hiring them. But once they actually get to work, are you noticing the performance is just much better, the team working better? Like, what can you share about that?
Yeah, look, I think there is an element of that. I mean, skills-based hiring doesn't solve the problem of having a good induction process and having your processes documented and well understood, because there's a lot of tacit knowledge that comes with how long you've been in a job. But I think the main thing is really it just bolsters the diversity of the team, which I think is really great. Specifically autistic people tend to interview really poorly. And I'm one of those autistic people. By going through something like skills-based hiring, it means that you're able to hire people that probably would have just bombed through that process, but who have really amazing skills that you can bring into your organization. So I think from my perspective, increasing the diversity of the team is really great.
Yeah. It's an awesome point.
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, in terms of the people that we're hiring, it definitely helps to increase or to improve the hit-miss ratio, I suppose, in terms of the number of people that you bring on board that don't work out, because you really can't afford to be making too many of those misses, particularly not in this market. The other thing that it tends to do, and something that I've sort of always tried to look for in employees, is that X factor. So every employee is an individual. Everyone is a unique person, and they all bring something to the table that's more than just their skill sets, I suppose, and their technical skills. And I think bringing in the diversity and improving the diversity and fairness through this type of process really enables you to get that balance in your team and to start to bring in some of those intangibles that you might otherwise miss if you're just going based on gut feel, where it's you're relying on your own personal biases, and sometimes it's just the whole mirror sort of situation where you just hire people that you think are like you, and that sort of acts as to skew the team in a particular direction and reduces that diversity. So I think those are probably the key benefits for me.
Yeah, awesome. Listen, both of you, thank you so much for sharing with us today. I mean, really, I hope everyone from the audience got that. Really, skills-based hiring provides that additional insight we need to make the best hires, make the process fair. All around, it's just a much better experience for the employer and for the candidates. Thanks again to our guests, Christian and Ani, and thank you everyone else for joining us. Later today, you're going to receive a webinar replay in your inbox. Stay tuned for more Vervoe webinars coming up soon. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again. Take care.